It's so good to be back with each one of you as we continue to dive into the scriptures and to God's second book, the book of nature. And there is nothing more powerful in nature than the human organism, right? When God created everything, his crowning act of creation was the human frame. And by God's grace, we will look at both scripture and our physiology as we speak about opportunities for ministry. Let's pray together as we begin. Father in heaven, we want to thank you so much for the privilege we have of coming together and yes, studying your word, but also studying your handiwork in the human frame. Please bless us to that end. Help us to see things that make a difference for us and for our ministries. We ask it all in the name of Jesus. Amen. Unfortunately, it has become a bad word. It used to be a non-polarizing word in the world of medical science, especially in the field of epidemiology, the study of things that come upon people groups. But now when people hear the word pandemic, they think of something that's very polarizing. They think of a particular infectious disease that stalked the world in 2019 and going onward to this day, COVID-19. But the word pandemic existed and was being used in medical circles long before it ever became a household word. And in this presentation, I want to speak with you about a very different kind of pandemic. It's not an infectious pandemic, but it is a problem of worldwide scope that is non-infectious, and it is the condition of high blood pressure, hypertension. And we're talking about it in this series because I believe God is trying to equip us as end-time saints with tools to minister to our neighbors, to minister to our families with. And he wants us to have, as we have already talked about, truly abundant health. And part of the secret to that is avoiding as much as possible the ravages of high blood pressure. As we talk about this subject, I want to look at 7 key high blood pressure messages that will underscore not only the importance, but the opportunity of this condition. And by the way, in medical circles, high blood pressure and hypertension are used interchangeably. Sometimes someone will be diagnosed with hypertension and they'll say, "But doctor, I don't have any stress at all. I don't feel tense a bit." Hypertension is simply the medical term for elevated blood pressure. And we'll talk a bit about what elevated blood pressure is. What kind of numbers are we talking about? We'll get there in just a little bit. 7 key blood pressure messages. The first one is it truly is a pandemic. Globally, high blood pressure is a problem. Some years ago, after our book came out, 30 Days to Natural Blood Pressure Control, I was invited to speak in Europe. And there's always a danger when you're working in one part of the world that you see problems just through the eyes of the demographics that you're familiar with. And so I'm thinking, well, as I go to Europe, and it was going to be an international conference, there'd be people from other parts of the globe, is high blood pressure as much of a problem elsewhere as it is here in the U.S.? Now, sometimes when we speak about what we'd like to call lifestyle diseases, we say, oh, it's more of a problem in the Western nations. But let's see, high blood pressure. I know you might not necessarily have warm feelings when I mention the World Health Organization, but the World Health Organization years ago used a very standard definition for high blood pressure. That has come into question over the last decade or so, but they were using numbers that medical professionals had used for years, and they said, we'll call people hypertensive. We'll say they have high blood pressure if either their systolic blood pressure is running above 140, that's the upper number, or their diastolic blood pressure is running above 90. Now today, experts in the field, this was about a decade ago when this data was collected, would say, well, that was being a bit lenient. In other words, we would tell people that their numbers should be lower than that to be considered normal, but we'll get there. So even if you use a cutoff of 140/90 for high blood pressure, what is the prevalence of high blood pressure throughout the world? That means what percentage of the world population or any national population has high blood pressure? And what's staggering is that figure is somewhere around roughly 20 to 40% of the adult population in every country in the world has high blood pressure. We're illustrating some of that in the graphic here with some of the ABC countries. We'll see if we can get that up so that you can see it. What you see, if you could see through my eyes, you'd see that in Albania, would you like to guess what percentage of the population has high blood pressure? Yeah, it's approaching 50%, somewhere around 40%, give or take. Austria, similar, around that 40% range. Belgium, Bulgaria, as you look throughout the world, really better spoken, maybe 30 to 50% of the adult population has high blood pressure, even using very, very lax standards. In other words, others would say the numbers are much higher. If you were to go to places like the Congo or Egypt, very similar to what you'd find in France. Again, you can see there's some variance, but pretty much everywhere, they're in that range of 30 to 50%. It's true in Guatemala. It's true in Iran. It's true in Israel. It's true in the Netherlands as well as Portugal. It's true in Japan. And as you go from country to country, from Serbia to Sweden to the US, pretty much 30 to 50% of the population throughout the world has this single diagnosis of high blood pressure. So is it truly a pandemic? Does it truly have worldwide scope? Definitely, definitely. Well, what's so interesting to me is it seems to be independent of how wealthy a country is, whether they have access to good medical services or not. It is truly a condition that if we talk about helping communities worldwide, if we could make more of an impact with high blood pressure, we'd be doing something powerful throughout the globe. If you look at the data, over 1 billion people on planet Earth right now have high blood pressure. But the obvious next question would be, who cares, right? Who cares? Well, we'll get there shortly. But for those of you that are feeling a bit glib right now, you say, I don't need to worry about this. Why is DeRose talking about high blood pressure? I'm never going to have that. I'm on a healthy lifestyle. Why is he talking with us about this? Can't you see the wonderful, healthy food that we're being served? Don't you realize we have exercise every morning here? Don't you realize they're helping us get to bed early at night? Yes, all these things are good for our blood pressure, and I'm glad that the folks at Secrets Unsealed value these health principles, and they've scheduled this into the program. Really, honestly, I'm not just saying this. I looked at the schedule, and I said, these people are thinking about our health, not just about our spiritual health, but about our physical health. But no matter how healthy you are, here's what the data suggests. The data suggests that if you do not have high blood pressure today, it is waiting for you down the road. Really. Actually, there's an interesting statistic, even using this older data, and that is, once you get into your 50s or 60s, your age is roughly the percentage of the population that has high blood pressure. So in other words, if I were to ask you, what percentage of 65-year-olds in America have high blood pressure? What would you tell me? 65%, you'd be correct. If I said, what percentage of 78-year-olds in America have high blood pressure? What would you tell me? 78%, and you would be correct. If I told you what percentage of 103-year-olds have high blood pressure in America, what would you tell me? No, you're right, it's not 103%. Couldn't be, right? Well, but here's what the research indicates as we get older. And by the way, this is true in the international data as well as in the US data. It's true of all countries. But here in the US, where it's been studied well, roughly speaking, if today you're in your 40s or 50s and your blood pressure is normal, if you live a normal lifespan, the chances are roughly between 8 and 9 out of 10 that you will develop high blood pressure before you close your eyes in death, okay? If you live a normal lifespan. And I know some of you are looking forward to Jesus' soon return. I think there's good evidence that many of us will not see a normal lifespan because something more dramatic will be taking place. But barring that occurrence, that's what the data shows us. In fact, up until about 10 years ago, I felt I could, with a straight face, tell audiences that you were only in one of two groups. You were either in the group that has high blood pressure today, or you're in what other group? That's right, the group that is going to develop high blood pressure. But about 8 years ago, something dramatic happened, and I now have to say there is a third group of people. What happened some 8 years ago where now I have to honestly, I was going to say with a straight face, but maybe that would be going a little bit too far, say there's another group of people. You all look like you're totally bewildered. Well, about 8 years ago, we published our book, 30 Days to Natural Blood Pressure Control. So now we can say there's three groups. There's those who have high blood pressure today, those who are going to develop it, and you guessed it, the third group is those who have read our book. Okay? Yes, I told you I couldn't quite say it with a straight face. Because it's true, even if you embrace an optimal lifestyle, some of us, because of early life history factors, because of genetic factors, have been dealt a hand that will predispose us to high blood pressure. Some of us were talking earlier in these meetings about high blood pressure, and I shared some things that we share in our book, and that is we now realize that individuals, women who are stressed during their pregnancy, late in the pregnancy when the kidneys of the infant are developing inside the mother's womb, stress can cause failure of optimal development of the kidney, such that those kidneys of those infants, when they're born, have only half the filtering units, we call them glomeruli, of the normal infants. This predisposes them to high blood pressure later in life, even if their lifestyle is perfect. So you can't look at a disease that has lifestyle connections and point your fingers at someone and say, that sister in the church, she would not have high blood pressure if she just read Dr. DeRose's book. No, that's why I said I didn't say that with a straight face. But I'm trying to make 2 points. One is some of us cannot avoid high blood pressure, but many of us we're going to see can, and we can definitely help our communities. But before we get there, I already said we've got to answer one other question. Many of you may think you know the answer, and that is, why should we even be concerned? And that's our third key message. First key message, global proportions when it comes to high blood pressure. Second key message, if you don't have it today, there's a good chance it's waiting for you down the road. But the third key message is that high blood pressure is dangerous. The crazy thing is most people feel perfectly fine with a disease that increases their likelihood of having all kinds of problems. Let's just look at a partial listing. Probably the best way to do that is graphically. And this particular graphic of the human organism illustrates some of the complications of high blood pressure. Most of us, I think, have heard and have made the connection with stroke. Leading risk factor for stroke is high blood pressure. Some of you, no doubt, know someone who has died from a stroke. Heart attack, major risk factor for heart attack, high blood pressure. Many of you likely know of people who've died from heart attacks. And when I speak about these conditions in those terms, you say, but Dr. DeRose, we have to die of something. A stroke seems so painless. A heart attack, you just fall asleep. And your next thing you know, actually you don't know. You're dead, okay? Next thing you know, Jesus comes if you died trusting in your Savior, right? But the point is, many people with strokes and heart attacks don't die. And we see them coming through our clinics and our offices all the time. Disabled, unable to, congestive heart failure. Someone basically bedridden because they can't generate any reserve. They don't have enough cardiac reserve, enough heart reserve to do some just basic activities. Someone who's paralyzed on half their body, or someone who's lost their vision because they had the stroke in the back of their brain in the occipital cortex, or someone who has problems with their balance or movement or articulation, or a frontal lobe stroke. Person basically may have profound personality changes. And so these are real great concerns. But beyond that, even if you say, I'm convinced I'm never going to have a stroke, it doesn't run in my family, heart disease doesn't run in my family. By the way, things can affect you that didn't run in your family. But even if you knew you wouldn't have any of these conditions, a leading risk factor for dementia is, you guessed it, what? High blood pressure. It's a risk factor for blindness, for kidney failure. Many of you know that I work closely with indigenous peoples, both in our country and abroad, but especially here in North America. For over 20 years, I've been hosting a radio show called American Indian and Alaska Native Living. And so I'm often working, fellowshipping with, dialoguing with Native American leaders. We were just doing that earlier this week in Minneapolis when the American Public Health Association annual meetings convened. We were meeting among other groups with the American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian Caucus. And as we speak with people throughout Indian country, we've heard some incredible stories about how lifestyle is making differences when it comes to diabetes among Native Americans. Some of you realize that very high rates historically of diabetes in Indian country, but because of focused efforts on lifestyle and other risk factors, diabetes complications and diabetes ravages in Indian country are actually being dialed back. So this is an encouraging story. In that context, about 8 years ago, I was speaking with a tribal health group in a state far from where I reside, and I was visiting with these tribal health workers. And I was talking with them about the overlooked dangers of high blood pressure. Because a lot of focus, like I said, in Indian country on diabetes, most of the tribes that I knew, they had diabetes programs. But the tribes were not focusing on high blood pressure. By the way, this is not a uniquely Native phenomenon. I find that there's a lot of programming on diabetes, a lot of interest in diabetes, but relatively little in many of the circles I deal with high blood pressure. And so as I was speaking with this tribal group, one of the community health workers spoke up and he said, "It's interesting you're telling me this." He said, "Because I was just in someone's home and they were in shock. They were in a state of total disbelief." And I said, "Well, what was happening?" And they said, "Well, this individual had just learned that their kidney function was so bad that they needed to prepare for dialysis." And I said, "Well, why were they so shocked?" And he said they were so shocked because they don't have diabetes. They had uncontrolled high blood pressure. So, in this person's mind, he'd made that connection, uncontrolled diabetes and kidney damage, but what connection had he not made? Uncontrolled high blood pressure, chronic kidney disease, and in his case, kidney failure. For men, you can see prostate problems linked to high blood pressure, blood vessel problems, the list goes on and on. High blood pressure is ravaging our bodies. Sometimes the illustration I'll use is it's like a little child coming up. If we had one, if there wasn't such a great children's program going on here, I might invite a little child to come up, hopefully not much older than 3 or 4, and I'd say, "Go ahead and hit me as hard as you can in my leg." Now, when I'm in a nice gathering of Christian folks and Seventh-day Adventists, most of the children would not even think, they hit you. Now, why would I do that? But if they were to hit me, how many of you think I would be permanently disabled when a 3-year-old hit me in my thigh? Well, you're not looking very confident. Do I look that frail to you? No, it's not likely that I'd be permanently crippled, right? But what if that little child just kept pounding and pounding, giving me that unnatural force on my leg? It may be a poor illustration, but when your blood pressure is too high, it's continually 60 to 100 times a minute, pounding on your blood vessels, pounding on your tissues, basically causing cumulative damage. So in these first 3 key points, I hope you're catching something. And that is, if we're really interested in ministering to our communities, ministering to the health needs of our communities, we should be interested in what? In high blood pressure. Actually, the reason I got involved with high blood pressure was because of this very phenomenon. Some of you remember the late Dr. Gordon Botting. Do you remember Dr. Botting? He was a health ministries leader out in this part of the country. And Dr. Botting came to me some years ago, and he said, "Dr. DeRose, I've been traveling around to health-focused Seventh-day Adventist churches." He said, "I've noticed many of them have health screenings or do health expos." And he said, "I found one consistent thing that happens in every health expo." Would any of you like to guess what in his experience, every health expo offered this specific screening? What was it? That's right, it was high blood pressure. Everyone was testing blood pressure. He said, but not one of those churches was doing anything to help people with high blood pressure. So some years ago, we partnered together, a number of ministries, and we came out with a series that we called Reversing Hypertension Naturally, 3 one-hour presentations dealing with reversing blood pressure using lifestyle means. But even after doing that, I said, well, this really isn't enough. People need more information, and that's what led us to come out with the book. Many of you know Dr. Greg Steinke. You might know nurse practitioner Trudy Lee. The three of us co-authored that book. And I was just surprised by what a demand there is in the world, in the secular world, for sound information about high blood pressure. That book came out about 8 years ago, and for several years, that book was in the top 10 blood pressure titles on Amazon. What was especially inspiring to me was that we prayed about what we should include in the last chapter of that book, because we were looking at a comprehensive approach to high blood pressure, and we said we can't leave out the spiritual dimension. And we wanted to include a biblical, spiritual focus in the book. But we're trying to write a book for a secular audience. We're not writing a book for Seventh-day Adventists. We're not writing a book just for Christians. But these principles are still powerful. So how do you do that? As we prayed about it, we believed that the Lord led us to look at the Beatitudes, those 8 blessings. Some people divide it into 10. We divided it into 8. Those 8 blessings that Jesus gave at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And we looked at how these principles have intrinsic blood pressure lowering properties. We put that in the last chapter of our book. When one of the most prestigious organizations that review books looked at our book, they actually have 2 levels of high recommendation. We didn't get the highest, but we did get in the second level. And they never tell you why they rate you the way they do, but if you read their review, it often is clear. Toward the end of the review, they said something like, but the authors made one small misstep. And basically, they said we included this chapter on biblical spirituality because it didn't seem to have a place in a medical book. Dr. Steinke, one of the co-authors, said, you know, one of the people that we quoted in the spiritual chapter, Dr. Harold Koenig at Duke University, worldwide recognized leader in the research on spirituality and health, he said, you should send this to Koenig, see if he'll comment on it, because we've quoted him in the book. And I thought, you know, Koenig isn't going to care about our book. And anyway, I sent him the last chapter. I said, you know, somehow I had an email address for him, and I said if there's someone on his team who might be able to look at this. And he replied in person. And he said, this may be, well, the most powerful chapter in the book, the most health-giving chapter. Now, yes, he's especially in that research field. You might say he's biased, but I would say, no, he's just aware of the data. And what I'm trying to explain to you is as Seventh-day Adventists, if we're talking about a comprehensive program for high blood pressure, we are in perhaps the best position to give that message to the world. So hopefully you're catching some vision here of an area for ministry. But I want to give you some other key principles, because you might be saying, well, who cares? You've told us about this terrible disease and we're all going to get it, and this has been a great conference until we came to this presentation. We're feeling really good, now we're getting discouraged. Well, here's the good news starting to emerge. Not only is high blood pressure bad, but controlling blood pressure dramatically lowers your risk of complications. And this brings us to another important discussion. Sometimes I'll illustrate this with the example of stroke, and it's illustrated here for you. And it's true whether you're in the first half of your life, you know, up until your 60s, or the second half. I know I might be liberal about the human lifespan, but I'm thinking in terms of some of you who are embracing healthful living. I met one of you who told me you have a relative who's 108 years of age. So this is not out of the realm of possibility. But no matter where you're at in that age spectrum, controlling blood pressure decreases your risk of complications. Now, I want to be very careful as we speak about lifestyle, because sometimes I have found that well-meaning people who understand the power of lifestyle make some bad mistakes. True story, many years ago, it was not a patient of mine, but someone that I knew socially was talking to me about their high blood pressure. This gentleman, who we'll call Gus, not his real name, of course, Gus said to me, you know what, Dr. DeRose, my blood pressure often runs high, 170 over 100, but when I drink my celery juice and get my proper rest and do, my blood pressure comes right down to 130 over 80. And I said, well, how often are you doing that, those ideal things? He said, well, I can't really do it that much, but I know I don't want to take medicine. And I told him that this is dangerous, okay? Walking around with uncontrolled high blood pressure is dangerous. But Gus knew he could control it with lifestyle. And he knew it was better to control it with lifestyle than with medications, and that may be true, and we'll get to that point in a few minutes. But he wasn't controlling his blood pressure. And sadly, I heard sometime later that Gus had a massive stroke that he never fully recovered from. So when I'm seeing a patient with high blood pressure, even if I think we might be able to get their blood pressure normalized, if it's very high and we've checked it, we know it's not just because they walked into the doctor's office and it was so scared, or just the so-called white coat hypertension. They may not even be afraid at all. They might think they're perfectly relaxed. But we've documented that they have significant high blood pressure. We're going to put them on a medication at first, because I don't want them to have a stroke while they're trying to implement some of these lifestyle practices. Are you following along with me? Now, some of you might say, well, Dr. DeRose, you're neglecting the power of the lifestyle message. No, I just want people to be around long enough that they can implement the lifestyle message. Key message number 5. And this is where we're going now, because you've been wondering, well, what is high blood pressure? How high is high blood pressure? There is actual confusion, even among medical professionals, about what an ideal blood pressure is. And you might be seeing more than one provider, and one doctor is saying, I want your blood pressure at this level, and someone else is saying that level. Now, first of all, I want to let you know, if you're seeing a nephrologist or a cardiologist, and you have major health issues, I'm not going to tell you what your blood pressure individually should be. Are we on the same page? Okay? Because there may be reasons why they're trying to do something. Maybe you've got an aneurysm, or you've got severe kidney disease, and they're using some, maybe not the general guidelines with you because you're dealing with some specific issues. Are we on the same page? So don't go and say, hey, you got to watch Dr. DeRose's lecture because you're giving the wrong guidance to me. We together on this? Okay, having said that, now here's why there's confusion. Because first of all, if you look at the data, if you are not on high blood pressure medications, and we ask the question, what is an ideal blood pressure? We have data going back decades. It's not a complicated thing. And the basic answer is, if you're healthy, the lower your blood pressure, the better. Now, I know some of you are raising your eyebrows, but we can definitely, from the data, tell you that there are benefits from getting your blood pressure naturally, without medications, down to at least 110 systolic and at least 75 diastolic. You say, but wait a minute. Even the most strict guidelines today, they're happy with a blood pressure of 120. Well, let's look at some data. Again, this is not, like data that nobody knows about. This is one of the most widely publicized in the stream of cardiovascular disease studies over the decades. Way back in the 80s, there was a study called the Mr. Fit study. And they looked across the US population at blood pressures, among other things, and they found something very striking. If you divided the population into 10% slices, we call them deciles, and you looked at those in the lowest slice, so those individuals, if you could read the fine print on the slide, less than 112 systolic. Okay, so they're 111, 110, 108, 95, whatever, okay? They're below 112. And you compare them with individuals who have blood pressures in the third decile. So these are individuals with blood pressures between 118 and 120, okay? 118 and 120. So what everyone today would say, that's great. But what this graphic shows, as you go from 110, say, to 120, you're increasing your risk of things like heart disease death. That's what they're looking at. You're increasing your risk of heart disease death by 30%. This is not insignificant. It's statistically significant, but it's also significant in terms of the number of people affected. So the answer is, what's an ideal blood pressure? If you're not on medications, the lower the better. Now, some of you say, but wait a minute. Grandma at 95 has a blood pressure of 90/60, and she gets up and she passes out. And she's got a number of issues going on. This is not a woman who's totally healthy. She's having trouble maybe regulating her blood pressure when she changes posture, which is often common as we get older. Those postural reflexes may not respond as briskly. But my point is simply, yes, it's true. If you have lower blood pressure, you are more predisposed to things like lightheadedness if you change position rapidly, and you're also more predisposed to cold hands and cold feet. Okay? What would you rather have? Cold hands and cold feet, or a heart attack or stroke? Lower blood pressure is generally advantageous. Now again, we're not talking about folks in intensive care units and people with heart failure, etc. Okay. Why is there confusion then? Once you add medication to the equation, everything changes. When you add drugs to the equation, just looking at, this is some studies that have been quoted when they're trying to come up with what guidelines should be for optimal blood pressure. And looking at a couple of different classes of medications, I'm not going to go into all the nuances of the study, but they looked at the better tolerated medicines. And I say better tolerated because every drug we know does have the potential for side effects. And these are two classes, the ACE inhibitors and the angiotensin receptor blockers, the sartan drugs and the pril drugs, if you go by their generic names, that tend to be better tolerated than some of the others. And what I want you to notice with this graphic, if you start on the right side of the graphic, okay? Now, when you look at most graphics, where do you like to start? Yeah, most of the time we go from left to right, but I want you to start on the right side. The right side, you see people with blood pressures in the range of 160 being treated with these medicines. They have high rates of cardiovascular problems, cardiovascular death, heart attack, stroke, hospitalization. That's what's being looked at in this graphic. As they take more of those medicines, get their blood pressure down into the 140s, their risk goes down of all those endpoints. As you get down to 130, your risk is continually decreasing with medication therapy. But in these studies, what happens when you take more medicine and get your blood pressure down into the 120s? Your actual risk goes up, okay? Now, there's other studies in other populations that don't show this, and that's why it has to be individualized. But the point is, in certain segments of the population, aggressively lowering your blood pressure with medication may cause more problems than just moderately lowering it. But here's one thing that all the data agrees on. The better you can get your blood pressure with natural therapies, the better. And so this is what we want to focus on. We want to focus on what we can do to help people with natural blood pressure strategies. Now, this brings us to our next key message, and that is, despite all this awareness about high blood pressure, despite all the available medications that are out there, despite growing information about lifestyle therapies, if you look worldwide, people are still doing a poor job with controlling blood pressure. Here in the United States, figures are often thrown around at maybe 50%, maybe better with high blood pressure control. But if you look worldwide, it is staggering. The vast majority of people with high blood pressure don't have their blood pressure even below 140 systolic. And you say, well, that is because maybe they don't have access to medications. Maybe they don't have access to information. You could go on and on with the list, but the bottom line is, despite all the information that's out there, people need help. That's what I'm trying to say. People need help, and you may be some of them. If you're not aware of what your blood pressure is, you say, well, hey, I checked my blood pressure in my 20s. I checked it in my 30s. I checked it in my 40s. It was always normal. I just stopped checking it. And now you're in your 50s. Or maybe older than that. You need to know what your blood pressure is. Now, here's my question, though. When it comes to this lack of optimal control, it's not just affecting people who don't know better. It's not just affecting people who don't have access to medical therapies. It's affecting even educated people in our country. Why would that be? True story, some years ago, when I was working at Weimar Institute. Weimar, many of you know, has a reputation for what? Natural lifestyle therapies. And so we would have patients from our community come to our facility, come to our clinic, because they wanted what? They wanted non-drug therapies. And I remember this woman came in from our community, and she was diagnosed with high blood pressure about 8 months before. When she walked into the doctor's office at that particular visit, she was completely oblivious to the fact that her blood pressure was elevated. She was in there for some other reason. The doctor put that cuff on her arm. High blood pressure. What do you think she walked out of that doctor's office with? That's right, a prescription for a high blood pressure medication. She started that medication, and she had side effects from the drug. So she went back to the doctor. What do you think the doctor did? Changed her medication. By the time she had come to see me about 8 months later, I think she'd been on 6 different medications. Now, praise the Lord, we were able to help her with lifestyle therapies. The Lord blessed those. She was able to get off her medications. And even after I left that practice some years later, I reached out to her. I still remembered her. And I said, "How are you doing with your blood pressure?" She said, "My blood pressure is still normal." But I tell you that story because it illustrates something. People, when they're diagnosed with high blood pressure in America, even though all the experts will tell you, you can read in all the textbooks, the power of lifestyle. But most doctors have come to the conclusion, I've heard doctors say this in public, don't waste your time with lifestyle because people won't change, just put them on medication. I've literally heard that in so many words spoken to physicians. People, when they're placed on medications, though, don't miss the point, often have side effects. If we were to look at a list of side effects from common high blood pressure medications, you would see some of them may not seem all that terrible. For example, frequent urination. These are common side effects of common high blood pressure medications. Now, most people, if they had the choice, would not sign up for frequent urination, but if it was a choice between using the bathroom more frequently and having a stroke or a heart attack, most of us would say, no problem, I'll sign up for the more frequent trips to the bathroom, right? Are we on the same page there? But what about fatigue? Does that sound all that good? Or dizziness, or an uncontrollable cough, exercise limitations, sexual dysfunction, and depression? When you go through that list, you can see why many people, if they're started on a blood pressure medication, by the way, even the best tolerated blood pressure medications, if you follow people over time, only about 2 out of 3 are still on that medicine a year later. The worst tolerated medicines, maybe 1 in 4 are still on the drug a year later. So the bottom line is basically what everything is pointing to is a need for cutting edge or not even cutting edge lifestyle therapies to help people with simple strategies, simple treatments that can help them with their high blood pressure. So you say, okay, Dr. DeRose, you've been talking with us about this for 45 minutes. What are we supposed to do? You've been motivating us to try to help our communities. What can we do? Well, let me tell you a simple structure that we've been using to help communities. Some of you may like a different mnemonic, but the mnemonic that we like has to do with a question. Common high blood pressure medications, we've been saying, may create more pressure or stress than the high blood pressure itself, at least to the person's psyche, right? They're feeling fine, they start taking a medication, they're feeling bad, and they say, why would I want to do this? I'd rather die 10 years earlier than feel terrible and fatigued and unable to do the things I used to enjoy. Here's my question. Might there be a no pressure solution to high blood pressure? Now somebody's saying, wait a minute, no pressure? I mean, is DeRose talking about a blood pressure of 0 over 0? Some of you realize 0 over 0 is what? Yeah, you're dead. No, that's not what we're talking about. But I'm talking about an approach to high blood pressure that won't stress you out, that won't make you feel like, why did I even do this? Why did I even find out I had high blood pressure? And we use this phrase, no pressure, as a mnemonic for 10 natural strategies for controlling high blood pressure. Now, some of you might say, we've seen other lists that look like this, but this is the mnemonic that we used in our book, 30 Days to Natural Blood Pressure Control, and you can see the list here. Nutrition, optimal choice of beverages, physical exercise, rest, environment, stress management, social support, use of natural adjuncts, refraining from pressors. These are things that actually raise your blood pressure, and then exercising faith in God. These are the 10 areas that we look at. We devote a chapter in the book to each of these areas. You say, Dr. DeRose, you're obviously trying to sell your book. Well, actually, I'm not. We don't even have the books here because we want to give you something better than that, and that is access to a free program. Some of us talked about this in an informal dialogue that was not recorded, but I wanted to make sure you're all aware that you can get the high points from our book by simply going to our website at timelesshealinginsights.org. So yes, the book has more material than you'll find in this free program, but let me just tell you about the program before I give you more details about how to access it and how you can use it in your personal evangelism, in your church or your church-based evangelism. Well, we've worked with churches, the first 3 churches that worked with this initial approach. The initial approach was in church, programs, presentations. We actually had used the book and video series. We found on average, those who started with high blood pressure lowered their systolic pressure 17 points and their diastolic blood pressure 8 points, okay? So that was 3 community programs run by churches throughout North America. Okay, you say that's small numbers, but it was highly statistically significant. And the literature that we used, very convincing. We see this happening in the real world. So where we took this is we said, well, it's costly, for people to have to drive somewhere to buy a book. And you say, well, a book isn't all that expensive and driving somewhere. And what would happen if we made this more widely available? And instead of having it based on a book and longer presentations, if we delivered it in short 5-minute videos. And that's what we developed with this program, 30 Days to Better Health. Very simple. This is not a high-tech presentation. It's me in my office taking 5 or 6 minutes a day for 30 days, going through high points in the book, 30 Days to Natural Blood Pressure Control. We expanded the messaging to include diabetes as well because the lifestyle principles are very similar. And if someone just goes to timelesshealinginsights.org or goes timelesshealinginsights.org/30, you'll immediately be brought to the sign-up page. If you sign up every day for 30 days, you'll get a link to a short video. Put those into practice, and we've heard amazing stories of people lowering their blood pressure, controlling their blood sugar, losing weight. Now, here's what's unique about this. When a person signs up for this, they also get access to a dashboard. And this dashboard gives you access to 4 one-hour presentations along with handouts that you can use in a church program. It's all absolutely free. You don't even have to tell me that you're using it. You don't have to be certified to do it. It's all there for you to use. So if you say, I want to do something in health ministry, I don't know what to do, I can't fly somewhere and get this training, our community is poor, we can't charge them even $20 for a book, what can we do? You can tell people about this program. We've had churches throughout the country using this program as part of their health outreach, and you can do that. Try it yourself first, see how the program works. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. You say, well, what all is in the program? You've told us it's important, but I want to leave here with something that I can actually do differently. I think I was in a grocery store, and a guy runs up to me. Dr. DeRose, I went to your lecture, and it changed my life. Now, how many of you think this is why speakers get big egos? Well, actually, there was no room for any pride because the next words out of his mouth were these. But it had nothing to do with anything that you said. And I'm thinking, what kind of a crazy guy is this? He said it was that one slide that you showed. That one slide changed my life. How many would like to see that one slide? It's in chapter 5 of our book. No, I'm going to show it to you right now, don't worry. It was a slide having to do with nutrition. It's from the Adventist Health Study. And here's the slide. It was looking at what we call cross-sectional data. So it's looking at the Adventist Church at a point in time. This is the current version of the Adventist Health Study, involving some 90,000 people in this particular paper that was published. And they looked at what happens when you decrease your consumption of animal products. As you move from left to right, you're looking at a decrease in animal product consumption. Now, many times I'll be talking with a patient or maybe just talking with someone, and the subject will come up about diet. And I'll say, well, what kind of diet are you on? And they'll say, Dr. DeRose, I am basically a vegetarian. Well, when I hear someone say that, this usually means they are what was defined in this group as a semi-vegetarian. Those who are eating meat, poultry, and fish less than once a week. Is that associated with a lower likelihood of having diabetes and high blood pressure? If you're looking at this graphic, on the left side is diabetes, on the right side is high blood pressure. The red bar are the semi-vegetarians. Do they have lower risk than those in the blue bar who are eating like the average American? Yes, most definitely. So eating less animal products is better. How about if you go a step further and you get rid of all the poultry and all the fish, and now you are a pesco-vegetarian? So you're having fish, maybe some milk, some eggs. Is that better than including just a little bit of meat and poultry? That's the green bar. Is that still better? Yeah, still better. How about if you say, well, listen, I'm going to get rid of all the animal products except the dairy and the eggs. I'm going to be what they call lacto-ovo-vegetarian. That's the purple bar. Was that still better? It was. But what group had the very lowest rates of diabetes and high blood pressure? The vegans, those who were on that total whole food plant-based diet, right? And you say, but wait a minute. For those of you that are scientists, you're saying that's cross-sectional data. That's just looking at a point in time. Maybe there's other things that would explain this. Well, some of you know the name of Dr. Neil Barnard. A while back, Dr. Barnard and one of his colleagues actually looked at some 80 scientific studies that were looking at what happens when a person over time, we call this a longitudinal study, you're following people over time. What happens when they start eating less animal products? And in every one of the studies, no matter whether they were defined as having high blood pressure or not, their blood pressure came down. Eat less animal products, and your blood pressure goes down. Eat less animal products, your blood sugar tends to go down. So can you see why I'm so happy with the foods that they're serving us here? Are you connecting the dots? Why, though? Why are plant foods so powerful? Now, for those of you that have come here, or those of you that are watching this recording, I am making available to Secrets Unsealed a special handout. You will get access to this handout if you go through the free online program, but you can get the handout right away. I hope I'm telling the truth, because I was told that I could give you some bonus resources that we'll make available through the Secrets Unsealed ministry. I've already sent them by email a handout that includes our longest table in the book, which is dealing with sleep hygiene principles. 3 pages of simple lifestyle things you can do to sleep better, okay? I know a number of you have talked with me. You're anxious to get that handout. It's now in the hands of a designated representative of the Secrets Unsealed ministry. But we included in that handout a number of the tables that I'm going to show you right now. The Lord knew, really, I did not have all the dots connected, but the Lord knew that you would want these tables. Tables showing you about magnesium, calcium, and potassium champions. When people hear about micronutrients, they often don't realize just how powerful these substances are in naturally lowering your blood pressure. Here's what's so amazing about these foods. I'm not going to put the graphic up, it's in the handout, but if you look at the best sources for magnesium and potassium, they're all plant foods. Now here's the question for you. We looked through the whole USDA database. That's not difficult to do now because you can do a computer search. For the top 10 foods in calcium per calorie, okay? Calcium per calorie. Now, this is important because we can only eat so many calories, right? And furthermore, most of us are not trying to eat more calories, so you really want to ideally eat the most nutrient-dense foods. That means the most nutrition per calorie. Are we on the same page here, following along? Okay? So the key question would be, what are the top 10 sources of calcium? When you look at it, calcium per calorie, or calcium per key unit of value. Okay? If you're looking at what's really most important about calcium content, what do all the top 10 foods have in common? They're all plant foods, that's right. There's no dairy products on that list. Now, it's true, some dairy products are relatively high in calcium, but the real calcium champions in nature, if you're looking at calories and calcium together, are your plant foods. You'll get those tables if you get the handout that has we put it all in one handout, the sleep hygiene secrets and these bonus handout that goes along with my first two presentations. So it's all in one to make it easy for everyone. Let me share with you one last thing about diet that got me very excited when we were first writing the book. We're projecting a slide here that we were told we should never project, and maybe they shouldn't show this on air because I don't have the copyright to it. But so perhaps we'll leave it off the recording. But here's the deal. I had a slide that was so complicated that every speaking coach would say only a fool would put a slide up like this. So not wanting to be considered a fool, I've decided that we'll just leave it out of the presentation. But it is a diagram of the complexities of the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. It's involving multiple organs and multiple hormones that are all involved with blood pressure control. One of the key hormones in this process is something called angiotensin-converting enzyme. And many of you, perhaps, whether you heard about this enzyme in connection with COVID or whether you've heard it in connection with blood pressure, it's a very key enzyme when it comes to cardiovascular health. What's very interesting is you can go to the drugstore today and you can buy drugs that work specifically on the angiotensin-converting enzyme. It just so happens that their generic names all end in pril. So if you're taking lisinopril or ramipril, okay, go through the list. If it ends in pril, what? It's an angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitor. If you take too much of those drugs, you can lower your blood pressure too much. Here's the beautiful thing that I learned. The Creator has put into foods natural ACE inhibitory compounds. And by the way, these are plant foods. So those of you today that enjoyed the broccoli and the beans, the soybeans, you had some tofu, you had some corn, you had some garlic in some of those dishes. I enjoyed some spinach that I found in some of those dishes that we were served. All of these things have natural ACE inhibitory properties. So as you're enjoying these delicious foods, what's happening? You're actually eating something that's helping to naturally lower your blood pressure. Isn't this amazing? I mean, we talked about a loving Creator. He's putting all these good things in food, and when it's prepared tastefully, you enjoy your food, and you're getting the benefits of it. And here's the best part of it. You can take too much lisinopril, and your blood pressure can be too low. But I have never seen anyone, never had a patient end up in the emergency room because they ate too much garlic and broccoli, okay? Now, I know there's an emergency room physician here, and maybe he'll educate me about that person who ate, too much chickpeas and spinach and came in hypotensive. But I've just never seen it, okay? So the point is, God has put these things into the abundant lifestyle. And so I want to encourage you to catch this vision. It's not just about diet. It's about regular physical activity. It's about spiritual health. And here's my favorite one. As I'm trying to give you an overview, my main appeal was for you to go through this free 30-day program. Did you all pick up on that? And where do you access it? timelesshealinginsights.org, okay? So that's my appeal. Use that in your churches freely. There's no charge for it. But the last thing that I really love is the power of social connectedness. Social connectedness has natural blood pressure lowering properties. So when I speak in churches and they invite the community there, I can unapologetically say, find some place in your community where people are interested in health and hang out with them. Do you know of any place like that? And if we're in a Seventh-day Adventist church, where are they? I say, you need to come back to this church. God's people have been entrusted with a life-changing message. He's entrusted it to you and me. Praise his name.